Well, earlier I took up the issue of Asia's infrastructure needs with the managing director of the World Bank, Mulyani. I began by asking her why there doesn't seem to be a huge appetite for infrastructure projects among Asia's private companies.
This is about who should bear what risk. A lot of experience now showing that construction costs and risks, while you have quite a lot of irony in which you have a lot of liquidity globally or regionally from pension funds, sovereign wealth fund, or even in this case because of the expansion of the monetary policy, that money is not really linked and translated into infrastructure development because of this one, that a lot of the owners of the fund doesn't want to bear this unnecessary risk. If I want to invest, but invest in something which is already work. So this is what we call it the not really market mechanism which is already happened and need to be created. Government has the constraint to do that. Maybe they need to have a skill to structure in a way that they are not going to use excessively, but at the same time invite more private sector.
Are the infrastructure projects that are being presented actually that attractive to a private investor when you consider, as you said, the risk involved, the amount of money up front that is necessary, the potential returns? Are Asian infrastructure projects actually that enticing to a private business?
At the macro level, definitely yes. The growing middle class, the growing economy is provide you with the obvious potential demand. The question is, this is really just potential or this is going to be a realized demand? What hampering this to become the real, what you call it, create an attractiveness of the infrastructure is sometimes because of the sectoral policy which is poorly designed that hampering the attractiveness, say, the pricing policy. Many of them, I mean, the consumer willing to pay because if they need it anyway, they spend maybe in a non-efficient way with sometimes a much higher amount of money. They don't get the right service. So there is a willingness and ability to pay. The sectoral policy is really dictated sometimes by the political populism, make the tariff extremely low. That really totally mismatching the potential market that can be created that way.
Let me just shift it tangentially a little bit to an ideological framework. In the UK in the past week or so, the government has admitted that their private financing initiatives and their attempts to bring private sector money into some public elements is not working. The government is having to step in, which is ironic given the UK's history in privatization of this. And it begs the question, doesn't it, whether actually public-private partnerships have been oversold on an ideological level, and whether governments shouldn't be actually thinking more in terms of, okay, we need to make sure that particularly the commons areas should be funded publicly and should be made for the benefit of the people.
It's an interesting, in this case, if you put it in an ideological way. I guess the premise that you have public money, you have a public institution, you have private money, private institution. They have a different motivation and they are going to collaborate in one project which is going to serve the public in this case. It's required quite a lot of review. I will not deny that, and especially after more than a decade with the PPP, the success story is quite limited in many countries in the world. I mean, even if you look globally.
For Asia, it's very pertinent, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Because the middle class that needs to fund the returns for the private sector just simply isn't there yet.
Yeah.
So it's a race between two different ideas.
Well, I am not really going to the extreme of this is more on ideological. I still actually have a lot of belief that the way you structure the transaction fail to capture the strength or the potential use of these two sources of funding that will enable the strength of these two potential players to work together. I still believe that institutional setting as well as policy setting or framework could overcome those weaknesses. Of course, you cannot deny that sometimes a certain environment or political environment is going to affect the sentiment. When you have a very low trust of the government or you have a very low trust of the private sector, the public is suspicious about the quality, the ability, the motivation of the private sector. that definitely will be much harder for you, even if you provide with what you call a transparent, a good, accountable transaction. It's not immediately there. So it is also a problem, not only just technical transaction, but also a level of trust as well as reputation of both players, that is the public as well as the private sector.
So in the Asian context, where you have so much potential and so much need for infrastructure to drive the economic growth and create the middle class, how is the policy framework in general terms in your mind? Is it coming to the right area to be able to generate the projects that are necessary or not? Well,
I must say that, especially for ASEAN, because the market and the demand is so obvious. This is the region which, if you compare across the globe, this is the region which is actually giving more what we call it a good problem. That is a problem of the ability to match with a fast-growing economy. This is not a problem in which you are in a hopeless situation, in which you even have the fundamental economic activities not there. So for here, I think you have a player, right? You have a government who is functioning. It's just the ability for the government to play or to adopt this policy framework that proven to work is really there.
Why is there resistance then?
Well, capacity could be. If you not always actually suspect that this is the political factor or influence. Sometimes purely capacity. That they cannot imagine, or in this case, adopt a certain sophisticated transaction that will involve quite a different party. The government, in my own experience with Indonesia, you know how to budget a certain project, you know how to put it in your Ministry of Public Affairs, Public Work, and then they are going to do the transaction. The regular plain vanilla government spending, that's easy for them. But if they are going to structure a project in which will require a certain chunk of transaction will be purely government, and then after that you are going to phase this out and offering into the public, that is totally outside their domain. So capacity is one thing. Second, I will not deny maybe also a lot of facet interest. Facet interest could be private, could be state-owned enterprise, could be purely department in this case. Not to mention for the big country, national and local government. So that will sometimes capture, hampering the ability to really come up with a real good framework of policy. And then the last one is sometimes it's just that you are not structuring the risk that then reflect the ability and the appetite to participate in one team.